My mornings had always unfolded in gentle repetition, a quiet ritual shaped by the steady hands of time. I rose with the dawn, brewed a cup of tea that steamed softly in the chilly kitchen air, and settled into my favorite armchair near the window. There, framed by the delicate lace curtain, I would glance at faded photographs resting in an old wooden frame on the windowsill. Faces smiled back at me, children laughing, my late husband's gentle eyes, grandchildren full of innocent joy. Those images were fragments of a life I thought I knew intimately, of a house I believed was mine in every sense. That particular morning, the sunlight fell pale and hesitant through the amber leaves scattered on the walk. The crisp air hinted at autumn's slow farewell. I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders and set out to fetch the newspaper from the porch, the path beneath my feet familiar and welcoming. But as I reached out to turn the weathered brass knob, my fingers met a cold, unyielding surface where warmth once beckoned. The lock was different, new, changed. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The metal glinted sharply under the light, mocking in its unfamiliarity. Slowly, my palm pressed against the door's tough skin, the chill seeping deep into my bones. That simple twist of a lock, so mechanical, so mundane, cut through the quiet sanctuary I had believed was unassailable. The profound betrayal settled quietly, a shadow creeping beneath my ribs. I stepped back, feeling life's familiar warmth retreat into a cold silence. The porch became my refuge in that moment, the wooden steps worn smooth beneath me as I lowered myself gently down to sit. The wind, soft yet insistent, rustled the fallen leaves, whispering secrets and carrying away the faint scent of summer roses that once bloomed there. Around me, the house stood still, indifferent and unyielding, a fortress now barred against me by my own blood. I closed my eyes and the past unfolded, a montage of laughter resonating through these walls, the clatter of little feet racing along the hallway. I remembered the broken toys scattered on the carpet where I had stooped to pick up fragments of joy for a child's tears. I saw again the weary nights when I soothed my son's fears, when the fragile threads of family held us together in shared warmth and quiet hope. All of those moments now seemed distant, hazy beneath a veil of stunned silence. No one had spoken a word, no warning, no confrontation, only the soundless message left in the changed lock. You are no longer welcome here. The exclusion was physical, but also deeply emotional, severing connections I had believed to be unbreakable. My heart clenched, a knot of pain and disbelief coiled tightly within. It did not shatter. There was no dramatic collapse, no tears spilling freely in the daylight. Instead, a heavy quiet settled over me, as though the shadows themselves had whispered of momentous change long before I had seen it. I stayed there until the sun dipped low, the sky melting softly into hues of pink and gray. The world moved around me, indifferent to the quiet exile I now navigated. I could no longer claim that familiar haven as mine, the house that had cradled me through decades of joy and sorrow. It belonged to others now, or so I was made to understand. Later, in the solitude of twilight, I retreated inside the little backyard where the last golden leaves clung to the branches. I let the memories rise unbidden and allowed the silence that followed to fill the spaces between them. I recollected the years of laughter and tears, the unspoken promises and broken dreams embedded in the very wood and brick. The scent of old paper from untouched books, the faint echoes of shared meals and quiet conversations, all now muted beneath a veil of cold distance. That night, as darkness wrapped the house like a shroud, I sat alone in my dimly lit parlor. The weight of loss pressed not just upon the door I could no longer open, but deeper, into the chambers of my heart. Yet no tears fell. I had cried silently before, in hidden moments when the burden of betrayal seemed unbearable. Now, the quiet enveloped me, steady and unyielding. In that stillness, I found a strange kind of resolve. The lock was more than a barrier of metal and wood. It was a symbol, an emblem of fractured trust and fractured family. But I was more than the sum of their dismissals. I would not be cast out without a whisper of fight. Silence had been their tool. It would be mine too, but quiet was not the absence of power, only the guise of it. Beneath the calm, a fire stirred. This exile was not my end. It was a beginning I would shape on my own terms, with the patience and quiet strength that had carried me through every hardship before. I sat long into the night, memories mingling with a creeping purpose. Outside, the stars blinked steady and cold, witnesses to the promise I whispered beneath my breath. I would rise, not with noise or fury, but with the steady, deliberate stroke of justice. This house, these walls, and the legacy it held were not lost forever. They were mine to protect, in silence if I must, until the time to reclaim them came. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of quiet reflection and slow, deliberate determination. I found myself drifting back through the years, revisiting moments both joyful and painful that had built the foundation of my life within these walls. Raising David after my husband's passing had been an arduous journey, undertaken with patience and sacrifice. I juggled work and home tirelessly so he could have what he needed, always believing that love and effort would bind us, that family was a shield against life's cruelties. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of quiet reflection and slow, deliberate determination. I found myself drifting back through the years, revisiting moments both joyful and painful that had built the foundation of my life within these walls. Raising David after my husband's passing had been an arduous journey, undertaken with patience and sacrifice. I juggled work and home tirelessly so he could have what he needed, always believing that love and effort would bind us, that family was a shield against life's cruelties. But the lock's cold turn betrayed me, showing that even the closest ties could fracture silently and suddenly. In the depths of night, my husband's voice returned to me, steady and wise as ever. He had always spoken about legacy not just as inheritance, but as protection, a promise to guard what mattered against harm. He believed this house was more than bricks and mortar. It was a sanctuary, a refuge for our bloodline. Yet that promise now seemed hollow, replaced by cold exclusion orchestrated by those I trusted most. Anger threatened to rise within me, sharp and fierce like a wildfire ready to consume, but I quelled it swiftly. I had learned through decades of trials that anger was a dangerous companion, blinding and fragile. Instead, I retreated within, seeking strength in patience and in the long memory of love and endurance that had carried me this far. Memories of subtle betrayals rose unbidden, dismissive glances, whispered comments behind my back, moments when my generosity was taken as weakness. David's distance deepened over the years. His eyes, once warm, had turned cold and wary. Emily, with her frosty composure and relentless pragmatism, was no stranger to calculated moves intended to isolate me. Together, they wove a tapestry of silent exclusion, and I was cast into the shadows. Yet amid that growing distance, one truth stubbornly anchored me, the recognition that the house was not truly mine in the legal sense. It was held in trust for my grandchildren. Until then, I had glimpsed this fact but never fully understood the implications. Now, it gleamed before me like a beacon, clarifying my path through the murky fog of betrayal and loss. I sought out the old drawer where I had tucked away papers decades ago, forgotten and dusty. There, brittle with age and carefully folded, lay the original deed, tax records, and financial documents. The scent of aged paper and ink filled the quiet room and stirred a profound sense of purpose. As I pored over the fine print, the undeniable truth emerged. The house was owned by the grandchildren's trust, not mine, nor David's or Emily's. This revelation reshaped the pain, forging it into a steely resolve. Reclaiming what was taken from me would not be a matter of pleading or anger. I had learned that emotional outbursts only deepened wounds and bred resentment. Instead, I resolved to wield the law with quiet force, to expose the truth hidden beneath false claims and selfish designs. The law may be impersonal, but it was blind to passion and keenly observant of facts. And facts I had. I carefully composed a letter to Eleanor, my longtime friend and now retired lawyer, choosing my words with precision. Eleanor had been a constant in my life, a guardian of justice in her own right, and I trusted her discretion and skill implicitly. Her prompt reply brought a brief flicker of relief. With her support, I arranged a meeting in her office, a sanctuary filled with the silent strength of countless pages of law and precedent. Before that meeting, I observed David and Emily, not with bitterness, but with quiet calculation. Emily's polite but insistent efforts to erase me from family matters became unmistakable, and David's clipped responses to my queries spoke volumes about his growing impatience and disdain. They moved through life with the certainty of possession, unaware that I was quietly gathering evidence and allies. I learned their routines and habits with careful attention. I noted their departures for social gatherings, the alliances they forged among neighbors, the veiled conversations that floated through the neighborhood. Murmurs of financial concerns, whispered fears about liabilities, and subtle conversations about assets all came to my ears, strengthening my understanding of their vulnerabilities. In the deep folds of my mind, these pieces fell into place, crafting a layered plan. First, to unmask the legal realities of the property's ownership. Second, to use that truth to cripple David and Emily's grasp on the house. Third, to safeguard the heirlooms and documents that embodied our family history. And finally, to prepare the way for a confrontation steeped not in anger, but in irrefutable legal authority. I understood that this battle would not be won through loud protest or rushed actions. It required the coolness of a chess player who anticipates every move and counters with precision born of experience. The law's blind scales were ready to weigh truth against pretense, and I had the proof to tip the balance. This was more than reclaiming space. It was about restoring the integrity of a legacy betrayed by greed and watched over by my determined silence. I sat late many nights, notes and papers spread before me, drafting each step with care, my resolve hardening with each passing hour. This fight was carried out in shadows and whispers, in the quiet ticking of clocks and the slow turning of pages. It was a war where strategy and silence were weapons sharper than words or fury. Despite the fractures in my family, I refused to see myself as a victim. I was the stoic protector standing guard over what was rightfully mine to defend, the guardian of dreams woven through decades of dedication. As the days shortened and cold winds signaled the approach of winter, I cradled a silent vow inside me. The silence imposed upon me was not absence, but a weapon, a shield to guard my resolve and a sword to wield with justice. And in that quiet power, I would rise again, patient and unyielding, to reclaim what had been wrongfully taken. The moment I stepped across the threshold of Eleanor's office, a wave of calm washed over me. The scent of old leather and countless legal tomes surrounded us, imbuing the room with an air of quiet authority, a place where truth was sought and justice could be delivered. Eleanor, still sharp-witted despite the years, greeted me not with fanfare, but with the steady professionalism I had come to rely upon in countless conversations spanning decades. Without wasting time, I unfolded the fragile folder containing the documents I had painstakingly gathered, the brittle deeds yellowing at the edges, watermarked and stamped with years of history. the tax statements, bank papers, and contracts whose ink had faded but whose meaning remained clear and unyielding. Eleanor's eyes scanned the pages carefully, her lips pressed in a thin line of concentration. "This confirms it," she said finally. "The property is held in trust for the grandchildren. Neither you nor David have legal ownership individually." I felt a surge of vindication that was tempered immediately by a hard, steady resolve. The fragile sheet of paper was more than proof. It was a weapon, a shield to hold close and a sword to wield. "Then the lock change and exclusion," I began, but Eleanor shook her head. "They knew what they were doing. This was deliberate, a power grab meant to intimidate and erase your presence. Legally, they have no grounds." I nodded, absorbing the weight of her words. Yet I knew that legal truths, no matter how clear, often faced resistance baked into personal betrayals and entangled emotions. The plan, therefore, had to be more than law on paper. It had to be unassailable, carefully crafted, and executed with the kind of quiet precision that could not be undone by threats or lies. Our meetings continued over the following weeks, quick and efficient, each session forging my growing understanding of the legal system's way of untangling family secrets and conflicts. Eleanor pointed out avenues I had barely grasped: the possibility of contesting illegal exclusion, the mechanisms to reclaim control over assets connected to the home, even the leverage held within financial documents evidencing mismanagement or deceit. With Eleanor's guidance, I began assembling a case that would stand firm against manipulation. Every bank statement, every contract, every bill paid without my knowledge became a thread in the web of undeniable evidence. I took meticulous notes, marking inconsistencies and placing them alongside the testimonies I planned to gather. But it was not just about collecting paper. It was about observation and strategic patience. I knew David and Emily's moves were calculated, but perhaps they underestimated the depth of my resolve and the breadth of my experience. I watched them carefully, blending into the quiet corners of the neighborhood, noticing where their confidence faltered. There were subtle signs: Emily's furtive glances over her shoulder when she thought no one noticed, the hurried conversations that stopped abruptly when an unexpected visitor approached, the whispered comments about money that carried more fear than ambition. David's impatience sometimes bled through his mask of authority, cracks in the facade that revealed frustration over my unyielding silent resistance. Using all the patience earned from years of balancing family and personal struggle, I kept close to my purpose. I spoke little of my plans, avoiding hinting at the storm I was preparing. Instead, I focused on the details, reviewing documents again and again, meeting with Eleanor, mapping out the steps that would lead to reclaiming control. I contacted financial institutions discreetly, inquiring about statements linked to the property and looking for irregularities or unauthorized actions. Every piece of information became a valuable tool. Every shadow of doubt provided footing for the argument I was building in silence. There was power in this quiet preparation, a power that did not shout but whispered steadily, climbing steadily toward a crescendo I controlled. The house was not an accident of ownership. It was a legacy, a promise inscribed in legal trust and family memory. I would use every resource available to defend it. At times, loneliness crept over me, a cold companion in the long hours of research and planning. But even in that solitude, I was rooted deeply in purpose. I thought about my grandchildren, their names underwriting this trust, and I felt the weight of responsibility settle over me like an iron mantle. This fight was not for me alone, but for them, a promise to protect their inheritance from the greed that had threatened to erase it. As the weeks passed, the plan began to take shape like a carefully woven tapestry, intricate and strong. I would start by legally challenging the changes made without my consent, The locks changed, the bills redirected, the insurance policies altered. Those acts were not just disrespect, they were violations. Simultaneously, I would secure the possessions that held our family's story, the photographs cradling decades of shared moments, the letters filled with memories and promises, and heirlooms imbued with both sentimental and legal significance. These items were more than things, they were symbols, silent witnesses to a history that no betrayal could erase. And I would set the stage for a confrontation not born from anger, but from undeniable proof, documents laid bare and truth spoken calmly, a force that would leave no room for lies or denials. Evenings were often spent drafting letters and organizing records, reviewing each detail with relentless precision. As the house slipped deeper into winter's grip outside my window, inside I felt a growing fire. The cold world beyond these walls was a reflection of the chill I had endured, but beneath my steady breath and steady hands, a powerful warmth grew. The law was an instrument of patience as much as justice. I would strike not with haste, but with the deliberate force of years of preparation. Each step forward was measured, calculated, and purposeful. I watched from a distance as David and Emily made plans, oblivious to the net tightening quietly around them. I knew their greed blinded them to the fact that I held the truth, not just in paper, but in wisdom and patience. Their arrogance was their weakness. They assumed this was a game of quick wins and loud claims. But I had been playing for decades, quietly mastering the art of endurance and silent influence. This advantage was mine to wield. The house, my home, was not mine by simple claim, but by the solemn promise bound in law and blood. It was a trust I would uphold, a legacy I would protect, and a fortress I would reclaim piece by calculated piece. In this stillness, in these quiet battles fought with documents and determination, I became more than the excluded mother. I became the quiet storm on the horizon, the unyielding force ready to reclaim what was never truly lost. And when the time came, the confrontation would be a carefully composed symphony of truth, silence, and justice, one that would echo far beyond these walls and through the hearts of those who dared betray the ties of family. Until that moment arrived, I waited, planned, and prepared. The storm was coming, but it belonged to me. The evening unfolded with the quiet certainty of a whispered vow kept. The house, cold and still outside, cradled memories in every corner, memories woven through decades of love, struggle, and resilience. This night, as the wind rustled the bare branches outside, I prepared for a delicate reclamation. Each movement was practiced, certain, and deliberate. The chill of winter brushed past the windows, but within, my resolve burned warm and steady, a fire rekindled beneath layers of loss. Their absences had given me the opening I needed. David and Emily moved through social events with the confidence of possession, unaware their hold was slipping, invisibly but inexorably. I had arranged for a locksmith I trusted, a quiet man, familiar with discretion and the respect a home like this demanded. Together, we crossed thresholds that had been barred to me, stepping softly into the space that was both refuge and battleground. The house greeted me like an old friend, creaking beneath my feet, its walls alive with echoes of laughter, whispers, and tears. Each room carried traces of our family history, breathing tales of joys and hardships only understood by those who had lived them. I moved through each room with reverence, gathering pieces of our shared story, heirlooms worn by time, framed photographs frozen in happy smiles, letters penned in long, quiet nights, all tokens of our lives that spoke louder than any argument ever could. Every object I carefully boxed was more than just a possession. It was a testament and a sanctuary. Removing them was an act of deliberate reclamation, a silent declaration that the legacy I cherished could not be stolen by changed locks or cold indifference. These relics were bridges between past and future, a quiet assertion that, though they had sought to erase me, they could never erase the truth or the love embedded within these walls. Simultaneously, I took measured control over the more abstract aspects of ownership. Working with Eleanor, I had quietly begun redirecting financial responsibilities away from David and Emily's grasp. Mortgage payments and maintenance funds were rerouted into a trust aligned with the grandchildren's inheritance. Insurance policies and essential bills were systematically transferred into my name, a web of safeguards built with patience and legal precision. This was no act of vengeance. It was justice enacted with the calm certainty of someone who has endured betrayal but refuses to yield. Each silent maneuver was a step toward restoring balance, toward transforming exclusion into empowerment. Beyond the house itself, I discreetly sought out real estate consultants who evaluated the property's worth with utmost confidentiality. The appraisals were not a threat, but strategic tools, options held in reserve should the battle require liquidation under the trusteeship's authority. Despite the growing tension beneath the surface, I maintained quiet composure. This was a war not of tempestuous outbursts, but of subtle shifts, of patience measured against time. The home itself seemed to pulse with a comforting presence, its walls whispering encouragement as I moved steadily through each stage. Being inside once again, navigating rooms suffused with memories, stirred a complex mix of sorrow and quiet pride. The house had been physically barred from me, but spiritually and legally, it remained mine to protect. My quiet acts of reclamation were declarations of endurance, a mother's persistent bond, a guardian's unwavering commitment. My footsteps echoed softly, carrying memories and hope as I worked through the night, the rhythm of my breathing steady alongside the crackle of fading embers in the hearth. Each careful gesture was a note in an unfolding symphony of silent justice, building momentum toward a reckoning that needed no raised voice to carry its power. I envisioned the day David and Emily would find their supposed dominion challenged, the house standing firm under the legal weight I was assembling. But I knew confrontation demanded more than anger or accusation. It required absolute clarity, undeniable proof that would expose lies and deceptions without the need for tantrum or plea. Patience remained my greatest ally, silence my shield. What unfolded was not a rebellion fueled by bitterness, but a profound love for the family legacy, for the sacred space this home represented, and most importantly, for the grandchildren whose future I was pledged to protect. Through nights thick with thought and resolve, loneliness crept in at times, a cold and unwelcome companion. But my heart beat steady, fortified by years of resilience and duty. The exile I endured by their design transformed into a journey defined by purpose, strength, and justice. This house was more than bricks and beams. It was a life's work, a gathering place of dreams woven through tears and laughter. Now, as I quietly retook what was mine, the tide of justice rose, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Each quiet step, every unseen effort, built the foundation for a confrontation to come, one conducted not in anger, but in truth. When that day arrived, the weight of undeniable evidence and the calm assurance of justice would echo far beyond these walls, touching the very souls of those who dared betray family bonds. Until then, I remained patient, ever watchful and prepared. The storm of reckoning was gathering just beyond the horizon, and I was ready. Days blended into weeks as I balanced my life between the public and the unseen. To the outside world, I was still the quiet mother, the woman who had always been there, carrying her burdens with grace and dignity. Yet beneath that calm exterior, my mind was a whirlwind of strategy and resolve. I knew that the battle I fought was as much psychological as legal. David and Emily thrived on the assumption that they could silence me, that my quiet presence would be forgotten like an unwanted shadow. But I was nothing if not enduring. Their steps of exclusion only fueled my determination to reclaim what was fractured. My conversations with Eleanor grew more detailed, uncovering additional avenues to challenge control, statements to be requested, notices to be formally served, and timeframes legally mandated that favored the rightful owners in trust. I learned how to weave together evidence and procedure into a tapestry impossible to deny. I began assembling a dossier, photocopies, notarized affidavits, financial records, tools that would serve as both shield and sword when the time came. Every morning, I reviewed the stacks of paper with the steady hand of a woman determined to win a war fought in silence and subtlety. There was an unmistakable satisfaction in this quiet labor, a contrast to the chaos David and Emily had introduced into my life. Theirs was a world of sharp words, quick decisions, and brash moves. Mine was a world of patience, calm, and steady progress. In the evenings, I sat by the window, the cold wind pressing against the glass as I traced out plans, considered scenarios, and imagined the moment when all the pieces would fall into place. This was not a matter of pride or vengeance. It was about justice, about restoring order to a family fractured by greed and fear. As the first snow began to fall, blanketing the world outside in white silence, I felt my own resolve crystallize. Winter was harsh, cold, unyielding, like the challenge before me. But like all seasons, it was temporary. Spring, with its promise of rebirth, was coming. I awaited that spring, knowing that when it arrived, so would my moment to stand firm, to confront with truth, clarity, and absolute certainty. My voice would be calm, my proof irrefutable. And the house would no longer be a place where silence meant exile, but a home reclaimed by rightful guardianship. Until that day, I planned, prepared, and persisted. The storm was coming, but it was mine to command. The late afternoon settled over the house like a heavy but clear curtain. Outside, the brittle cold hinted at the coming winter, but inside, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation and quiet strength. I heard the gravel crunch under tires, steady and heavy, then the familiar sound of the gate swinging open with a confident push. David and Emily arrived earlier than I expected, their presence a stark contrast to the calm I had cultivated over months of preparation. They approached with the assured air of possession, the keys in David's hand a symbol of their assumed control. Yet, as he reached for the lock, that assurance faltered. The key turned against a new mechanism, a lock no longer theirs to command. The door held firm, impervious and cold, denying them entry. I emerged, my footsteps soft but firm. I met them with eyes steady and voice calm, the years of silent planning settling into the moment like armor. "You no longer have keys here," I said simply, each word carrying the weight of truth and finality. For a moment, neither spoke. The shock was visible, their arrogance, usually so loud and brash, silenced. I watched as confusion flickered briefly across their faces before steadiness returned, though muted and shaken. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out the folder brimming with evidence, brittled deeds, notarized pages, careful balance sheets aligning with the law taken under Eleanor's guidance. I laid every document before them on the worn kitchen table, the heart of this home that had become the center of our fractured family's silent battle. "This house," I began, my voice measured and cool, "has always been held in trust for the grandchildren, never for you or me individually. Eleanor has verified this. You have no legal right to exclude me or deny access." Emily's composure cracked. The confidence that had masked her envy and greed wavered, and I saw the briefest tremor of recognition cross her face. David's jaw clenched, his posture rigid, a man confronted by truths he sought to dismiss. Still calm, I pressed play on a recording I had kept, a captured conversation where Emily's voice, sharp and calculating, admitted to changing the locks behind my back. Her confident facade shattered into a brittle whisper, the evidence undeniable. The room fell into a suffocating silence. No loud exchanges filled the air, only the quiet reverberations of justice settled into every corner. Their eyes held questions, regret, and inescapable understanding mingled with stubborn pride. "This home," I said softly, "was never mine to give or to lose. It belongs to our grandchildren, and I am their guardian. Your betrayal has only sealed your defeat." David's voice finally broke the stillness, low and strained. "You're overstepping." "No," I replied steadily. "I am standing for what is just. Your decision to cast me aside was a betrayal of the family, and I will not be silent any longer." Emily looked away, unable to meet my gaze. David's posture betrayed more than his words, muscles tense against a truth too hard to accept. For a long moment, the weight of the past and present suspended between us. The house, once a silent witness to exclusion, breathed again as a place reclaimed. I had turned their silence and lies against them, not with fury, but with the calm inevitability of truth. They left without protest, defeated yet wordless. Their retreat filled the space with a new kind of peace, one that whispered of restitution and quiet victory. Seated once more by the window, I cradled a warm cup of tea, watching the last light fade. The burden I had carried so long, the burden of false ownership and silent exile, dissolved into the evening air. Tears slid silently down my cheeks, tears not of sorrow or anger, but of relief and closure. This was my moment, the culmination of years, tempered by patience and resilience. The house was no longer a battleground, but a sanctuary once more. I sat quietly, a guardian returned to her post, filled not with triumphal noise, but with the quiet strength that had carried me through every trial. The legacy I protected was intact, held not by force, but by steadfast resolve and truth revealed in silence. Days drifted by in a quiet rhythm that carried little hint of the tempest that had come before. With David and Emily's retreat, the house seemed to exhale, shedding the heavy cloak of tension woven by their silence and exclusion. Their departure was marked not by bitter words or final confrontations, but by a solemn, weighty silence that filled the rooms they had once occupied with such cold certainty. I often found myself sitting on the porch as the warm glow of late afternoon sunlight filtered through the amber leaves, their slow descent a gentle reminder of time's passage. The garden, once a neglected space, seemed to breathe anew with soft whispers of renewal. Behind me, the house stood resolute, no longer a fortress closing me out, but a sanctuary I had quietly reclaimed. I inhaled deeply the crisp air, feeling the burden of years slip quietly from me like autumn leaves carried off by the wind. The pain of exclusion and the sting of betrayal receded into a distant memory, replaced by a swelling calm that long solitude and patience had carved deep within my chest. Tears came unexpectedly, not as a flood of grief, but as gentle streams of release and relief. They traced silent paths down my cheeks, washing away the weight of false ownership and stolen trust. I welcomed these tears. They were balm, transformation from suffering into strength. Within these walls, steeped in memory and love, I traced the contours of life lived in both hardship and joy. The faded upholstery of chairs that had cradled generations, the books worn at the edges from repeated reading, the delicate china in the cabinet, all whispered stories of family, resilience, and quiet endurance. Though the scars left by betrayal remained, they no longer defined my existence. They shaped its depth. I was no longer the woman who had been unceremoniously locked out, but the unwavering matriarch who reclaimed her rightful place through tenacity and dignity. Each day began with simple rituals: brewing tea, tending a few hardy plants in the garden, opening windows wide to welcome the fresh air, and sitting in the soft glow of morning light that bathed the familiar rooms. The house listened and spoke back in silent comfort, a partner in healing. Friends who had unwaveringly stood by me visited often, their presence a reminder that loyalty outlasts deceit. Their laughter brought warmth, knitting together broken threads into a tapestry of shared strength. Conversations were slow and tender, a gentle repair of the bonds frayed by years of conflict. At night, I often found myself by the window, wrapped in a shawl, gazing at the stars that peered softly down. I whispered again those words that had become both shield and sword. Silence was my only weapon. No longer a cry of pain, those words now sang of victory, a quiet power that had shifted the tides without a battle cry. The house had transformed from a place of exile to a home reborn, a living testament to endurance. My legacy, woven of sacrifice, love, and unwavering faith, was no longer at risk, held safe in the steadfast resolve that refuses to be broken. Peace settled in like a gentle tide, soothing the hollows that betrayal once carved. This peace was my victory, earned not with shouts, but with the deep, abiding strength of a heart that endured in silence and rose in truth. In this place, where shadows had loomed, light now danced freely. And so I remained, a guardian, quiet yet unbreakable, watching over the home and legacy that no betrayal could truly take away.